The palace froze the moment the order was given. No warning. Warning, no discussion, no polite royal notice. Just a decision so bold, it shattered decades of unspoken rules. Prince William ordered Queen Camilla's portrait to be removed from the Grand Gallery. But what replaced it, what rose in its place behind a velvet curtain, was not just a painting. It was a message, a declaration, a quiet, unstoppable shift in royal power that even the king could not stop. It began in silence, the kind of silence that spreads like a crack through ancient stone. Early that morning, as the palace still yawned awake, a confidential directive was sent from the office of the Prince of Wales. Short, clear, impossible. Remove the portrait of Queen Camilla from the Grand Gallery. No delay, no announcement. Staff stared at the paper as if it might burn their hands. No heir had ever challenged the royal portrait placements, not even during the most brutal family feuds. Portraits were not decorations. They were history, identity, hierarchy carved in oil and gold. Moving one was not a simple act, it was a strike. Yet William's signature stood alone at the bottom of the memo. Not co-signed by King Charles, not acknowledged by the Queen. Just William, unshakable, absolute. Within hours, senior courtiers felt the tremor. Doors closed, messages rushed through private channels. Some whispered that William had crossed a line no royal should cross. Others whispered something even more dangerous, that he had crossed it on purpose. Because that morning, under the high ceilings of the Grand Gallery at Windsor, something extraordinary happened. A team of carefully selected staff members arrived with a velvet covering, sealed crates, and orders not to speak a word. They worked in silence as Camilla's portrait, the one installed after her coronation to symbolise her full acceptance, was unfastened from its hooks. For years, her image had hung there as proof. She was no longer the outsider, no longer the scandal, no longer the shadow haunting the crown's future. Now it was taken down in less than 15 minutes. The wall looked strangely bare after her portrait disappeared through a side door. Bare, but not empty. Because waiting on the opposite side of the gallery, wrapped in dark cloth and guarded like a state secret, was something William had kept hidden for more than a year. Rumours flew through the palace corridors before the frame even touched the wall. Some said William was declaring war. Others said he was protecting someone. A few, the ones who had watched the royal tides shift for decades, said he was doing something far more dangerous, telling the world who the future truly belongs to. But there was more. Much more sight behind this sudden act, because the portrait William chose to remove wasn't just Camilla's image, it was Camilla's power. Her place, her carefully constructed rise from scandal to royalty. Removing it wasn't a slight, it was a blow. And when the leak finally hit the private palace channel, a classified memo titled Gallery Realignment Directive, the shock became a storm. The memo didn't mention Camilla at all. Instead, it stated that royal spaces must reflect the monarchy's future orientation. That single phrase spread like wildfire. What future, whose orientation, and why was Camilla no longer a part of it? Courtiers demanded answers. Senior advisors attempted to intervene, but William refused every meeting request. He gave no explanation. He offered no apology. His silence was sharper than any speech. As palace tension thickened, the public remained unaware until evening came. Just before the final tour of the day, a single velvet curtain in the Grand Gallery was drawn back. Gasps filled the hall. A few visitors stepped forward without realising they were witnessing the most controversial royal reveal since the days of Diana. There, bathed in soft golden light, stood the portrait William had been hiding for more than a year. Catherine, Princess of Wales, unveiled like destiny itself. She was painted in deep sapphire, standing tall with a gaze that didn't look up or down, but forward, bold, steady, unshaken. The air around the canvas seemed to vibrate with unspoken power. This wasn't a painting of a princess, it was a proclamation. The message was unmistakable. Camilla's reign over symbolic spaces had ended. Catherine's era was beginning. But this was only the surface, because behind the brushstrokes, behind the secrecy and the silence, was a deeper battle. One rooted in old grudges, quiet rivalries, and a woman who had been underestimated for far too long. And tonight, for the first time, Catherine would not be erased. But the real explosion came not from what William removed, but from what he revealed next. Because as the portrait of Camilla vanished behind that velvet curtain, a new canvas emerged. Massive, radiant, shimmering under the chandeliers like a crown forged from light. A painting of Catherine. Not the Catherine the public sees in photographs, nor the carefully curated royal mother shown in documentaries. This was something else. Something majestic, commanding, almost mythic. She stood in the painting in deep regal blue, framed by brushstrokes that burned like fire and gold. Her posture was serene, yet powerful, one hand lightly touching the fabric of her gown, the other resting near a symbolic orb of light, as if the artist had captured not just her presence, but her destiny. And the room changed in an instant. Advisors who moments ago murmured their loyalty to the Queen Consort now stood frozen, eyes locked on Catherine's portrait as if witnessing a prophecy. It wasn't just a painting, it was a declaration, a reminder, a message from the heir of the throne to the entire institution. This is the woman who represents the future of the monarchy. This is the moral centre, the unshakable heart, the one who commands respect without demanding it. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. For months, palace watchers whispered about hidden rivalries, subtle power plays, and quiet tensions between Kensington Palace and Buckingham Palace. But no one expected something this bold, this visually explosive. It shattered the polite illusion that everything behind royal walls is calm and unified. Because in a family where every gesture is analysed and every expression becomes a headline, removing a portrait is not a simple act. It is a warning shot. And unveiling Catherine's majestic painting in its place. That is a direct challenge to the hierarchy that Camilla and her supporters believed was unshakable. Some in the room saw it as a son defending his wife. Others saw it as a prince correcting the course of a monarchy drifting toward division. But a few, the ones who know how royal strategy truly operates, understood the real meaning. William was shifting the centre of power, not with speeches, not with confrontation, but with pure, undeniable symbolism, a portrait that doesn't just hang on a wall, it redefines it. And as whispers spread through the corridors, as staff exchanged anxious glances as the Queen Consort's loyalists clenched their jaws, one truth became impossible to escape. Catherine, even in silence, held more influence in that single painting than Camilla ever had in 100 public appearances. Rumours swirled instantly. Was this pre-approved? Was it an intentional message to the monarch? Or was it William staking his claim before someone else tried to box him in? Every second the portrait remained uncovered, the tension rose, thick, electric, dangerous. Because suddenly this wasn't about art. This wasn't about tradition. This was about the future throne. And the woman who would stand beside it. But the true shockwave came after the unveiling, when palace insiders leaked what happened once the doors were closed and the public smiles faded. According to those present, Camilla's reaction was swift, icy, and sharp enough to freeze the room. She didn't raise her voice, didn't lash out, but her silence carried a weight that even the most seasoned advisors couldn't ignore. She stared at Catherine's portrait for several long seconds, her expression unreadable, before turning toward William with a look that insiders later described as controlled fury wrapped in royal etiquette. And yet William didn't flinch. He stood tall, shoulders squared, eyes steady, as if he had already prepared for this confrontation long before the curtains were ever drawn. What happened next felt like the moment two generations of power finally collided. Camilla's allies subtly moved toward her, forming a protective circle, while William's advisors stayed rooted behind him, their tension visible even through their carefully composed faces. The atmosphere thickened, almost suffocating, as if centuries of royal pressure and hidden conflict were pressing down on that single room. But then Catherine entered, quietly, gracefully, with that calm presence that disarms without trying. She didn't rush to William's side, she didn't glance at Camilla, she simply stood before the painting, looking up at her own portrait with a mixture of humility and strength, as though acknowledging not the image itself, but the responsibility it represented. And something shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but unmistakably. Even those loyal to Camilla felt it, that magnetic pull Catherine brings everywhere she goes. A quiet force that doesn't need thunder to be felt. Catherine's presence softened the fury, but it didn't erase the divide. Because behind the polite nods and practiced smiles, a new understanding took hold. William had drawn a line, and Catherine, whether she intended to or not, had become the symbol of that line. Advisors later whispered that this single moment, this portrait, this unveiling, may have altered the internal balance of the monarchy. It wasn't rebellion, it wasn't disrespect, it was a recalibration, a reminder that while crowns and titles carry power, legacy carries more, and Catherine, through years of grace under pressure, unwavering dignity and quiet resilience, had become the heartbeat of that legacy. Behind the walls of Buckingham Palace, debates erupted. Should the portrait stay? Would the king address the growing tension? Would Camilla demand the painting be moved, or would removing it spark an even greater backlash? Every possibility carried risk. Every move could ignite a storm. But one thing was becoming undeniably clear. William's statement could not be undone. Because once the world saw Catherine framed in light, once her image replaced Camilla's in that symbolic, sacred royal space, the message spread far beyond the palace. It reached the advisors, the press, the public, and the silent observers of royal power. A shift had taken place, smooth on the surface, seismic underneath. And in that shift, the future became clearer than ever. The monarchy's strength would not be measured by noise, but by the quiet power of the woman whose portrait now commanded the room. The